First off, not all screws are created equal. This is a 24-inch log cabin screw, not to be used in any kind of fine woodworking. Here's a little bit shorter one. This is like a deck ledger screw. And then we get down to my favorite one, the drywall screw, which I'll show you more of in just a moment. So again, I'm Don Roden, and we're going to talk about choosing and using the right fasteners. If you have any questions as I go along, do not hesitate to jump in and ask. So the first thing, I will not use drywall screws for woodworking. Drywall screws are meant for one thing, drywall, period, end of story. They are designed to hold gypsum board or drywall to a wood or a metal stud. I got to change my camera here real quick. Oops. There's a drywall screw. Here's some fun facts about a drywall screw. Number one, the drywall screw has a number 8 head, but it has a number 6 shank. It's hardened, and it has threads all the way to the top, as you can see, and then it has a bugle head. The bugle head is designed to dimple the paper on the drywall, not break through it, because if you break through the paper, you lose a lot of your holding power. And if you wonder why it snaps off, because it gets down into the wood, especially hardwoods, and it's not designed for hardwoods. You have coarse threads for wood, and you have fine threads for going into a oh, yeah, you can see my green screen behind me. Where's my screen? Anyway, I'm gonna go back to the PowerPoint. So I'll talk more about that. Are you seeing my screen? The PowerPoint?
Yes, we can see your PowerPoint, yes.
Okay, good. So screws are broken down into 2 basic groups now. There is this traditional screw, which are your older ones, the one here on the right. You'll notice that the shank is the same diameter as the outside of the threads, which is also called the major diameter. These are from the old days when they actually used tools to cut the threads. So your shank had to be the same diameter as outside of your threads. And down here toward the bottom, the threads are deeper, but as you get closer to the top, they get shallower as you go along. Today's production screws uses wire, and they're rolled in, and the shank is the same all the way down, and that gives you a deep thread, which gives you more holding power. Here's your shank diameter, your minor diameter, and your major diameter. A lot of times people will comment to me, well, your number 8 screw is not a number 8 screw. Well, yeah, it is. Are you measuring using traditional screw thread or screw diameter or dimensions to measure a production screw? They are 2 different things. Let's talk about head styles. Most common is a flathead. A flathead it has about an 83-degree angle that goes down into the shank of the screw and is designed to the upper part sit flush with the top with the edge of the wood. It's typically a countersunk. It's the most common used screw there is. Another version of that that's become popular is a flathead, but this one has nibs, has little ridges built in under the head, and it's designed to clear out the material a little bit to help it countersink itself. Next, we've got a trim head. Trim head is like a finishing nail. And now there is some screws out that have tiny heads. They're even smaller than the trim heads. The one thing about the trim heads and the tiny trim heads, of course, your recess has to get smaller in order to be able to fit and work with that small of a head diameter. Next, we have a bugle head. You'll notice that the bugle head is shaped for, it's like the end of a trumpet or a bugle, and that's what gives it its name. Next, we have an undercut head. An undercut head is used specifically for drawer slides. You know, the thin metal on drawer slides, the head is, the tapering on the head is actually cut shorter so that it just goes through the metal of the slide and you don't have that extra taper in there trying to dig into the wood because the screws are only about 5/8 of an inch or so long. So an undercut head is really great for, like I said, installing drawer slides. An oval head. This is more of a decorative head. You've got a little bit of a dome on the upper side. It just gives you a nice decorative. You see these a lot in your traditional screws, screws that were made or used in restoration work or production pieces. A lot of these will have oval heads. A round head, it's going to sit flush. The bottom of the head is going to sit flush with the surface of the wood. And that's where, oops, I'm going to back up one here. That's where, when we start to measure, and I'll talk about measuring screw heads in a little bit, but that's where you measure from because that's where it's going to sit flush with the wood. All right, well, come on. There we go. A round washer head. You'll see a lot of round washer heads in pocket hole screws. You'll see it in other types of screws that where you want to have a little bit more surface area to hold the joint together. So it's designed and built in with its own washer. You don't have to put a washer on it. The manufacturers have come out and put that on. So it's just an added little benefit. It gives you a little bit more surface area again for your holding. Panhead. Panhead, it's more domed. It does have a little bit of a flat spot on the top. Domed and truss head often get confused. A truss head is very similar to a panhead, except its profile is much shallower. A wafer head screw, it's kind of like the undercut head screw, but they're much larger. These are, you'll find a lot of these in construction now, larger timber screws, deck screws will have wafer head screws, things like that with much larger diameters and lengths. Philister head. And hey, we're all from Minnesota. I'm originally from Minnesota. And oftentimes these are called cheesehead screws because it looks like a round chunk of cheese. Just don't tell those Wisconsin folks, you know. You'll find Philister heads mainly in pocket hole screws. Our pocket hole screws are designed with a Philister head, and I got a whole section on that in a little bit. Conformat head screws. Conformat, you'll find those in a lot of knockdown furniture. The conformat, it's a two-step system. The larger shank right here will be inside your piece that you're adjoining. It gives you a nice head to hold on to, and then it tapers down into the screw thread area in the piece that you're screwing into. And it's designed for furniture, again, you're going to knock down or you're going to take apart and put back together. Could be several times. You find these a lot in IKEA and other flat pack type furniture where the customer is going to put it together. Hex head, those have been around for a long time. You'll recognize them, you know, the standard bolts, lag screws, things like that will have a hex head. There aren't a lot of screws anymore that have just a hex head. Most of them have gone to a hex washer. Again, you'll find those in construction lags, a lot of screws that are replacing the so-called construction, the lag screws. They'll be more like a construction or a Spax has some lag screws, and some of them have the hex washer on them. It's when you want to put a socket on it and get a lot of torque on it to drive the screw. All right, we're going to move into common recesses. Most common recess, been around the longest time, is the slotted. Back in the day when screws were first invented, it was the easiest to make. Just using a tool to cut a recess in there. And it was, while demonstrating a push driver in putting in a slotted screw, that P.L. Robertson slipped and hurt his hand, causing him to look for a better way of creating a recess. And that's where square drive came in. Actually, square drive was invented back in the 1800s in the United States. The challenge was that at that time, they couldn't figure out a way to mass produce it. So in the early 1900s, after P.L. Robertson had his accident, and he was a Canadian inventor, he found a way to mass produce the square drive. The next one is a Phillips recess. Phillips was invented in 1937. And before that, Henry Ford wanted to have an exclusive to Robertson square drive in building his cars. And Robertson wouldn't give it to him because he had given it to somebody else and gotten screwed over by that person. So he managed to get it back, and he wasn't going to let it go again. And so Phillips was then developed in 1937, and it became the screw that Ford used, which is kind of the reason that we don't see much of the square drive didn't take off as much here in the United States. Kind of Ford and his power, he was able to kind of, in a way, blackball it. Next one is, this one's called a square reset, a square or a, down here. It's a, let's see, this one's called a combo drive. So this one, the combo drive is a square, it's a Phillips, or there are bits that are made for the square Phillips, the combo drive itself. And these are starting to make a little bit of traction in a lot of things. Now, I'm sure that you're all kind of in favor of this next one. Oh, wait a minute. Where's my, oh, it's the next one after. This is a posi drive. This next one is a posi drive. It's European. You'll find this in a lot of European screws. Now, you won't see these, the lines will be on the screw, but that's not part of the recess. And you need to use a posi driver head on it, or a driver bit on it. The next one, Torx. Torx was invented by Camcar for the automotive industry in 1966. And as a lot of you know, that it has made its way into the industry, into the woodworking community, and is quite well used in a lot of screws. The one thing about Torx is it's a registered trademark to Camcar. Now, each of the manufacturers of wood screws has started to come out with it, and they're not going to use Torx because they'd have to pay cam car money for that registration or using that name, that brand name. So they're developing their own name for it. Spax has got Spax. Oh shoot, what is it? Oh, Spax is T-Star. And then there's another one that's out, is they have a little dimple right down in the end of the bit to help keep the bit so you can drive the screw straight, because there is a little bit of play in the Torx bits that allow it to tilt about 1 or 2 or maybe 3 degrees off center. So they're starting to put this little dimple in it. Torx has trademarked their own name. Spax has got, it's called the T-Star Plus. I can't remember what GRK's got their version of it. All the manufacturers, they're coming out with it, but they're all branding their own name. And that's why you'll find a bit in every box that you buy of screws now from screw manufacturers that come out with Torx. Because in Torx, you go T1 through 10 in sizes, and then it goes by 5 up to 25. And yeah, somebody just mentioned Star Drive is another. That's a very generic name. And a lot of the screw manufacturers, like I said, are branding their own names, but Star and Torx bits, Star bits, they all fit. They're all the same. Goes up to 25. Then there's a 27. It's like, why is there 27? I don't get it. And then it goes to 30, and it goes all the way up to, I think the largest one's like a T90, but that's a pretty big bit. But very common, it goes up to a T60 that you'll find in a lot of woodworking screws. So that's the thing about Star or Torx. And the last one is your hex. Your hex washer head, your hex drive, using a 6-point socket to drive your screw. I tell a story. I grew up in the woodworking community. I grew up in Minnesota. My dad had a cabinet shop in our basement, and he was a carpenter, contractor, self-employed. He built houses and did remodeling. And I always say that, if my dad would have known about square drive, I wouldn't have ever heard so much of whoever invented Phillips could have just as well shoved him up there every time he cammed out a Phillips. So square drive, the Robertson square drive, is specifically designed to reduce cam out. The bit and the recess has a very slight taper to it, and it's designed to hug that recess. The bit is designed to hug the recess very snugly so that you can hold it upside down, you can hold it in any direction, and it will hold without magnetism. Do that with a Phillips, do that with a Torx or a Star, any other drive, it's not going to happen. So it snugly holds your bit and your screw together, and you'll find Star or hex or Square, excuse me, Square is starting to make its way into the electrical industry. So electrical boxes and electrical screws for attaching outlets and things to the electrical boxes, they have a square recess built into them rather than either the slotted or the it's not really a Phillips, it's a cross slot, but now they're changing it. It's slotted and square, and electricians are loving it. It decreases wear and tear on your driver bits. It's less prone to spinning in the recess. And by the way, do you know how to get out a stripped Phillips screw? Use a number 2 square drive. The number 2 square drive will fit into the corners will fit into a square or a Phillips recess that's been cammed out a little bit. It'll get in there just enough, and if you slowly, you'll be able to back it out. The thing is that if you do start to damage your bit a little bit because it does start to get torn up, you can go to your grinder and take just a little bit off and you got a fresh bit. And then strength. It's designed for furniture manufacturers. It's been used in furniture manufacturing since the 30s. The woodworking industry has been using them. It just didn't catch on in a lot of other areas. The nice thing about square drive is there are 5 different sizes. You have a 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, unlike the Star or the Torch, which you've got so many different sizes. And again, it goes into manufacturers and their sizes, and that's why you get a bit in every box. Whereas square drive, and they're all color coded. Robertson color coded all the driver bits. So a 0 is a yellow, a green is a number 1, red is the most common, that's a number 2, a number 3 is a black bit or just an uncolored, and there's also it's an undersized bit for our corrosion coated screws. It's a number 2 undersized bit that allows for that coating, and it's also a uncolored. And I've never seen a number 4 bit or really the use for it. That's a pretty big screw, a 5/16 and up. So a 0 through 3 are the most common being bits, and the number 2 is the most common. Should fit any screw that you use in the shop. Let's talk about screw measurements. So a flathead, it has that 82-degree taper that goes down into the shank. Oh, I'm just reading somebody, so I'll address that. I'll come back and address your question in a minute, Patrick. The flathead, again, the length is measured from the top of the head to the point. Your diameter, your shank diameter is B, and your major diameter is C. That's your thread diameter. Again, in today's production screws, it's wire, they're rolled in, and it creates the same shank diameter all the way down, the B, that allows you to have what's called deep threads. If you look at a round washer head, you'll notice that the length is measured from the underside of the head. Same thing with the pan head. It's from where the screw sits flush, is designed to sit flush with the surface of the wood. So it's wherever that is, whether it's on a flathead on top of the head or a washer head or a pan head or any kind of head that sits flush with the wood, it's from the lower side of the head itself. All right, Patrick said, I've run across some screws that use an 8-point bit. These bits don't seem to cam out. Any knowledge on these? Yes. Fasten Master makes it's called a spider bit, and it's used for their Fasten Master, their long ledger board type screws where you're driving a long distance. You won't find these in any short screws of any kind. We're talking screws that are 8 to 10 inches and up in length. Excuse me. And so they call them a spider bit. It's an 8-point bit. Again, they don't cam out as much, but they're, again, for driving really long screws. Like I said, 8 or so inches in length or greater. There are some others that I can't think of the names right now, but I know Fasten Master, their ledger lock, they do have them. We carry those, so I am familiar with those. And again, you get a bit with every box. All right, screw sizes and applications. Your screw sizes go all the way from, well, they go from a number 4. There are some we carry our number 3s. They're really short brass screws for doing something like jewelry boxes and things like that. But the more common ones are a 4, a 6, an 8, a 10, a 12. When you start getting past 12, you get into 14 or a quarter of an inch. They're very, very close. And then you get into fractional sizes, 5/16, a 3/8, a half inch. Then it starts to go up by fractions. But in number sizes, a number 4 through 12 is the most common. And we're starting to see some out that are number 14s. We're adding a line right now from a company called Big Timber. They're out of Montana, but they build there are a lot of big log cabin or construction lags. And a lot of theirs are 14s, which equate out to about a quarter of an inch. So you take the slash out of a 14, or you put the slash in a 14, and you got a quarter of an inch. It's pretty close. So number 4 is designed for small crafts, jewelry boxes, attaching hinges, very light duty, 3/8 of an inch to 3/4 of an inch in length. And you won't find any with unthreaded shanks. Anything less than an inch, you will not find unthreaded shanks. There's just not enough room, just not enough holding power. And you're going to be holding 2 thin pieces of material together. So the unthreaded shank is not going to make a difference. And number 6, again, small craft, hinges, drawer slides, children's furniture boxes, toys, light duty jigs, fixtures, usually available in a 1/2 inch to about a 1.5 inch in length. Once you get over an inch, you'll start to see some unthreaded shank, and it won't be very much, because I'll talk about general rules as far as lengths versus material that you're attaching in a little bit. Number 8, general furniture construction, cabinets, light duty construction, anywhere from 5/8 to about a 3 inch in length. They're very good all-purpose screws. You find them, they're great shop screws, whatever you're doing around the shop. We've kind of branded our 8s in this range as good shop screws. Like I said, you can do it light duty construction. You can build jigs. You can build cabinets, general furniture construction, things like that. Number 10, you're getting into general construction, heavy duty furniture, outdoor projects, decks, lawn furniture, boat building. You're getting 3/4 of an inch, and now you're getting a little bit longer and 4 inches in length. One of the things that determines the maximum length is how much you can drive them in without snapping the head off. Again, like I showed you with the drywall screw, you got threads all the way up, but that shank is very thin, and a lot of times it won't support the torque that happens as you go deeper into the wood. Somebody threw out, is it possible to get copies of these slides? Old guys like me don't have great memory. I will put a link up at the end. I have this exact page on our website, and I also have it as a PDF that you can download and have in your shop. It's very nice, and you can laminate it. It's 2 pages. You can laminate it together to have it nicely hanging in your shop. Does that work for you, Robert? All right, I'll look for a thumbs up on that. And number 12 and even 14s, heavy duty construction, hanging solid core doors, etc. You can get these in 3/4 inch lengths all the way up to a 6 inch in length is about general rule of thumb. Anything you go beyond that, 6 inches, you're getting into construction lags. All right, good. And I do have some other pages. I'll share McFeely's University in just a minute, or at the end, I'll share some things there. So if I forget about it, remind me about it, okay? All right, how do we determine the proper length of a screw? As a general rule of thumb, we say that 3 times the thickness of the piece that you're joining to the piece that you're joining to, 2/3 of that screw should be in your adjoining piece, just like you find right here. Now you'll notice that there is an unthreaded shank and it is completely through this piece that we're joining. We want to get the threads out of this upper piece, the piece we're joining, so that the two will pull together tightly. I'm going to switch cameras here for a moment. See if I can get a little bit more. Now I use the wedge. Oops, that's too much. I'll get some in there. You can see the screw threads in there. I use the wedge to intentionally do this. Those threads don't go all the way together. So if you've got a gap in between two pieces you're adjoining, and those threads do not go all the way through the upper piece of the piece you're running your screw through to join it to the other one, this is what's called board jacking. And you will never pull these two screws, these two boards together until the threads are completely out of the piece you're driving the screw in to pull it together into the piece you're joining to. You'll have to overdrive that screw. And that's where the unthreaded shank comes into play. And that's where drywall screws do not work in woodworking, because you have threads all the way through. Oops, I gotta back to share. That gives you your unthreaded shank wants to be the thickness of this wood. And that's why as you get over an inch, this unthreaded shank gets to be longer and longer to give you the threads so that they can go away all the way into the piece you're joining. We have a version of screw. It has a very long unthreaded shank, and it's designed for joining 2x material, which is actually inch and a half, inch and 3/4. You can see on the right that there is a screw, a standard screw, which doesn't have a long enough unthreaded shank to actually pull these two together, leaving a gap. So this head would have to recess down in deeper and deeper until those threads pass completely through this upper piece before the two will pull tight. Now you've just lost holding power because you've driven the screw down in deeper than you needed to. Our ProMax screw has the longer unthreaded shank for the 2x material, so it will pull together tight and you don't have to have the head go below the surface. Same thing applies in pocket hole screws. You want the threads to go completely through that joint and into the piece you're joining. Now this one I used too short of a screw. Intentionally, because I wanted to show the gap, the threads not meeting the gap. The other thing that can happen is you don't drill your pocket hole deep enough. So your pocket hole has to be drilled to the correct depth and using the right length of screw in order to get the proper joint. If you don't drill your hole the right depth, if you don't use the right screw, your joint isn't going to pull tight like you want it to. Here's a chart, and I'll show you where you can find this on our site as well too. Is that your material thickness a 1/2 inch to a 5/8? You're going to, in a general use, is a 1-inch screw. 3/4 inch is 1 1/4 inches. 7/8 to 1 1/8 is 1 1/2 inches. And 1 1/4 inches to 1 3/8 is 2 inch. And 2x material, which is 1 1/2 inches and up, is a 2 5/8 screw. And Craig has come out with some even longer ones now that you can use for joining 4x material together in pocket hole joints. Thread types. Come on, you know us woodworkers. Whatever we were taught, that's the way it is to go. It used to be fine threads were used for hardwoods like cherry, maple, oak, walnut. Coarse threads were designed for softwoods like pine, fir, poplar, cedar. Our pocket max screw, we have a Super 8 that is designed for man-mades, MDF, OSB, particle board, things like that. The thread design is just a little bit different. And it's the Super 8 is designed for just that. Now, our screws, our pocket hole screws with coarse threads have been tested such that the coarse thread will work in any woods, hardwoods, softwoods. You can use one screw for all. We still carry fine threads for those that still want to use the fine threads and go with that. It's just there. So the first slide is the first image. That's a properly drilled pocket hole. The next is a proper length screw. And this one shows a fine threads, and the threads are barely getting through there, but they did get through and will pull the joint tight. Here it is using a washer head screw. Again, your threads are going all the way through and cleanly into the board you're joining. One thing to notice here, in pocket hole screws, you do, and joining in general, you don't ever want to run into the end grain of wood. That is the weakest connection that you can make. Because imagine trees are like straws. The fibers go vertical. And when you run a screw into the end grain, you're running it into the straws or the fibers vertically, and you lose holding power. So you always want to, as much as possible, go into the side grain of any piece of wood to create your joint. And pocket holes are no different. So I always take and look at your layout of how you're doing your joints. Sometimes it can't be helped, but as much as you can, avoid it. So this is with a washer head screw, and this is with a Philister head screw. Here's the thing about our Philister head screws. The shank is the same size, but the Philister head is a size under the size of the screw. In other words, if that's a number 8 screw, that's a number 7 head. If you notice at the top one, the washer head is the exact diameter of the pocket hole itself. Whereas on the Philister head, there's a little bit of a gap there. They always talk about using an electric drill, a corded drill, in making your pocket holes. Why? Because in battery operated, you start to lose power the minute you use it. As that battery starts to decrease in power, it loses its charge, you tend to get a little bit more tear out in your holes. And if you have any fibers, and you can see in both of these holes, there's little fibers there in all of this area, because yes, I did use a battery operated drill to do these. There's fiber tear out there, and it can tend to hang up on this head and throw things off and not give you that clean seat for your pocket hole screw. Okay, so the pocket mac difference, our pocket hole screws have been tested. They give you 60% less driving torque with no driver bit slippage. 50% longer type 17 flute. I'll talk about the differences in point types and type 17 in a little bit. but that's this slot right here that allows itself to cut its way into your joining piece and allows for less splitting and a 45% reduction in splitting, cracking, bursting, and a 30% greater holding power or pull-out value. In other words, it holds the joint together much stronger. All right. Using the right screw for the right job. This is an actual piece that somebody sent in to me when they went online and they looked at screws and they bought screws that were designed to attach plywood to a metal stud. And here he was trying to attach composite deck boards to an aluminum frame dock. And it didn't go well. I don't know how many of you have ever worked with composite deck screws, and I'll talk about those types and the point types and thread types and all that in a minute. But yeah, when I told him he chose the wrong screws, that was kind of the end of the conversation for us. And we didn't refund his money or reimburse him for his drill driver. I love how, though he was very, very detailed about his drill driver. So let's talk about threads. Threads make all the difference. I mentioned earlier, production screw or a traditional screw. This is a traditional screw. You'll find these used in period pieces, in restoration work, things like that. You'll find that the shank is the same diameter as the major diameter of the threads, and the threads get shallower as you get closer to the head. Our famous drywall screw. Look at how thin that shank is compared to that traditional screw. Or even going to today's production screw. And this happens to be one of our ProMaster screws with the longer unthreaded shank. But look at the size difference between the shanks. And they're a number 8 head screw. Just this is a number 6 shank, and the ProMax or the next screw is a number 8 shank. Here's a number 8 screw, but has longer threads. But again, the shank is the same all the way up through. Here's a pocket hole screw. Philister head, type 17 point. All these the four so far have deep threads because they're rolled steel, and that's what can give us that deep threads consistently all the way along the shank of the screw. And here's a washer head pocket hole screw. All right, this is a trim head screw, and you'll notice these little serrations down at the bottom. This is another way that manufacturers have developed in creating, instead of the type 17 point, ways that it will cut itself in. The waviness in the first 3 or 4 threads of the screw act like a saw and cut the fibers of the screw as it works its way in. And this particular one has a diamond point on it. This actual screw, it's a Spax hardwood MDF screw. And when I saw this first demonstrated, I was blown away. The Spax guy that was in demonstrating this in the office took a piece of hardwood, red oak. And I grew up, my dad used red oak for everything, building cabinets and all that. And I remember driving screws through that, not pre-drilling, and it would split out. I don't care where in the piece of wood I was, it was going to split. This screw, I watched the guy drive 1 inch in from the end of red oak, no pre-drill, and it didn't split. He then took another screw and ran it in right on the corner of the wood, right where it went from the top to the side surface, right in there at a 45, ran it in, no split. I have run this screw into a piece of joining two pieces of MDF together, running through the face of one and into the side of another, no splitting. Blew my mind. The next one, we have twin threads. You'll notice it has the saw teeth or the serrations down at the bottom to cut its way in. And then all of a sudden it has a long space of unthreaded shank and then some threads at the top. That space in the middle, that unthreaded, is designed to span the gap and yet allow the two to be pulled together tightly and hold together tightly. Now you've got threads in both sides, but you have that gap or that unthreaded that spans the gap. Next we have is a why am I all of a sudden conformat screw. I've got my notes here. Conformat screw. Again, knockdown furniture. You'll notice that the upper part, the long smooth shank, that's designed to go through the sidewall of the piece, and all your threads, again, it has deep threads because that shank is the same all the way down. And this one happens to have a blunt point. So you have to pre-drill your hole in there, and you should pre-drill it with everything. But this requires a two-step drill bit. You have the first part of it, it's like a pocket hole drill, where you've got the part that will drill for where your threads go, or in a pocket hole, it's where the shank will go through. But then the upper part is wider, and you don't want any gap there. You want that snug so that it doesn't wobble. So it's designed, the drill bits are designed to drill specifically for conformat screws. Most common sizes are a number 5 millimeter and a 7 millimeter conformat screw. This is a construction lag. Very quickly back on the conformat screw. They also make a sharp pointed one. I don't run across those very often. We don't carry any of them. It's just the blunt point are the most common ones to use. This is a standard lag screw. You probably need to put a washer on here because the head would need a little extra support going into wood. But those are the kind of lags that I grew up with, using a ratchet, because we didn't have a lot of power drivers back then, or you used an electric drill that didn't have a clutch on it. If you drove it too hard, you'd snap your wrist and elbow. But again, like the conformat screw, you've got an unthreaded shank. It's a little bit wider, but your threads, the shank is the same all the way through to give you a consistent thread depth. Next, this is a construction lag. Notice the serrations down on the end again. Again, these are longer screws. The unthreaded shank is the same diameter all the way down to give you greater thread holding, deep threads. You've got a hex washer head, so now you don't have to put a washer on it to add a little bit of extra space in your holding power. One less step of threading or putting on that washer and then starting to drive it. Next, we're going to get into, this is commonly known, this is a type A thread. This is commonly known as a sheet metal thread. It's different than a wood thread. In most wood screws, you'll have 10 threads per inch. It's a very common thread pattern. So it's 10 threads per inch. Whereas in sheet metal, you're joining sheet metal or you're joining two pieces of sheet metal together. And usually it's going to be, a small gauge. So you need to have the threads much tighter so that it'll actually hold better. Excuse me, I'm going to need a good drink of water here. So this is a type A thread. This one is a particle board. Came around in the 70s when there was a need for fasteners designed exclusively for softwoods, very much like particle boards and things like that. There's a 15-degree angle in conjunction with a 30-degree trailing edge. So you can see the differences in the upper and lower angles of the threads. And these are designed for engagement in things like particle board and things like that. Next one, this is called a high-low thread. Don't see this around a lot, and a lot of people don't use it, but they're around. This one's called a twin fast or a double lead screw. You'll see it has 2 threads on it. And then we get into the, this is the twin fast. This one is the high-low. So it's got a high thread and a low thread. Just gives you a little bit extra holding power. The twin fast, 2 equal parallel alternative threads. They have more threads per inch, and a sharper rise allows them to be driven quickly. So again, the tighter the threads, the faster the screw is going to go in. And then finally, we have fine threads, a fine threaded screw. You'll find these in, you'll find them in pocket hole screws. You'll also find them in drywall screws where you're going through gypsum into sheet metal, and they'll have a sharp point on it designed to go into a metal stud, a sheet metal stud. Again, the threads are designed to get into that sheet metal, and you don't want that number 10 or 10 threads per inch, because then you'll have a little bit of play and you'll never pull tight. While this isn't a thread type, this is a type 17 point. You'll hear this referred to often. It's got a type 17 point. It's a slot that's cut in there. And it's designed so that you can see on the teeth, the threads on the right-hand side are offset. So it'll actually cut its way in as it goes around. It's not a thread type, but it's just a point type. Some pocket hole screws, there will be a little bit longer than others, but it usually goes 3 to 4 threads, the first 3 to 4 threads. This is called a double type 17 point. It has 1 slot in there, the initial, in this case, the first 2 threads, but then it has a much longer, more vertical one that goes up, just to give you a little extra cutting length in screws. You don't see this very often, but it is out there. Another one of a type 17 point, sharp point. This one's called a sawtooth, or in a lot of times it's called a box tooth. You can see that it's somewhat square, and it can have slots cut in it so that it acts like a circular saw blade. It has teeth on it. So you'll see that. Spax uses it a bunch. Our ProMaster Plus screws use a sawtooth type thread like this. Again, the first 3 to 4 rounds of threads give you that sawtooth type effect. Drill point. Drill points are used for when you're going through wood and then into like a metal decking, like a trailer decking, or in through not just sheet metal, but into soft metal or metal where it's going to use a drill point. So that's like a drill bit. Again, and that's the type of screw that guy bought to attach his composite decking to an aluminum frame dock. That would have worked for the aluminum frame, but it won't work for the composite decking. So aluminum, metals, that's the type of point that you're going to use. And you'll notice that the threads are more fine. Again, you're going into metal and you want to have those threads grabbing, and the 10 threads per inch. And you can see they're not as deep as the deep threads because you drill and you just need enough to hold on to that metal. And this one on this slide is a conformat with a blunt tip. All right, let's talk about drilling types or drilling and types of drills. This is one that gets me, and I was one of those years ago. Bought a really nice set of tapered drill bits, thought that was the cat's meow. You know, boy, this is great, until I started learning more and more about it. So drilling types and types of drills. I'm going to lay these out here. I'm going to switch cameras here for a minute. I can get my drill bits to lay still. There we go. That works. So here I have two drill bits. I have a standard drill bit. Actually, it's a brad point drill bit, and the other is a tapered drill bit. The tapered drill bit is designed for traditional screws. The standard point, or the brad point in this case, is designed for your production screws. You use it, and there's a chart, and it's download. I have a downloadable PDF on McFeely's University that tells you the drill bit sizes for the various different screws. The standard point drill bit is the same diameter as the unthreaded portion of the shank of a production screw. Here's what happens if you use a tapered drill bit. If you use a tapered drill bit with a standard point, a standard or production screw, if you'll notice on the top, I drilled that pilot hole using a standard drill bit, straight drill bit, and notice all the thread engagement all the way down. The bottom one, I used a tapered drill bit. It was the tapered drill bit for the same size screw, but notice that only 4 threads down in the bottom have any really holding power. So if you use a tapered drill bit, you've lost a lot of your holding power because the threads, that tapered drill bit drilled it out too wide and the threads won't hold. All right, so here we have, a production screw on the left and a traditional screw on the right. The thing about using that tapered drill bit and drilling for traditional screws, you have to drill the exact right depth. If you over drill it, again, you're going to lose holding power because that wider part of that bit is going to drill and you're going to lose. It's not going to be as tight for holding those threads. A straight drill bit going in for a production screw, I could drill 6 inches beyond it and I'm still going to have the holding power because it's the same diameter as the shank in the middle of those threads. Sometimes you got to drill a little bit bigger based on, and I've got that on my chart in drilling for hardwoods because you're not going to get the expansion. The unthreaded part of the shank is not going to push the fibers out. That's why it's critical to use the right drill bit and countersink when you're drilling pilot holes. Don't use those tapered drill bits for drilling for a traditional or production screw because you'll only have about 3 or 4 threads holding down at the bottom. And of course, you can't look inside there and see it. So you're thinking it's got great hold, and it doesn't. All right. This came out of our catalog. I left a bunch of catalogs there, so hopefully each of you got one. This should be built in there somewhere. And I also have a much better build out of this on the website, and it has a downloadable PDF that you can print out and, you know, laminate if you want to have it in your shop. Like I said, it goes much further than this. But you'll notice the one thing is hardwoods, the drill bit for them is a little bit larger than for softwoods. And that's because the hardwoods, of course, the screw shank is not going to push the hardwoods out of the way as well as in softwoods. So it's always best to try in a scrap piece before you go drilling a lot of pilot holes and find out, oh, they're a little bit small and this epay that I'm drilling in just will not move out of the way and I'm snapping heads off. When we talk about drill points, there's brad point drill bits, which have that nice point on it. You can put it right where you want it and it won't go dancing away. In which your standard point drill bits a lot of times will. I remember what I was, I was drilling something. I was drilling in metal the other day and using a standard point drill, and that thing was walking all over the place until I went and got a punch and created a little divot for it to sit in. And then the last kind is the taper drill bit. And you'll notice that right down at the end, it tapers into a more finer point, but that's designed to follow that traditional screw shape. All right. Let's talk about corrosion, coatings and corrosion. Down at the bottom is the least corrosive or least corrosion resistance, all the way up to the most corrosion resistance. We go all the way from brass plating, statutory bronze, a black oxide with lacquer, clear zinc, nickel plating, yellow zinc gets better, blue coat. Blue coat is Craig's trademark coating for their outdoor screws. Spax has a high corrosion resistance. You'll oftentimes see it as an HCR or an HCRX. Trying to remember what GRK is, but they all have, various companies have their corrosion resistant coating screws. A lot of times, and if you check them out, a lot of times those can be used or will be used in place of stainless steel. We have a company that buys from us that builds piers out in Alaska, out into the ocean. And they refuse to use stainless steel screws because the wood won't last as long as the screws. They're replacing the timbers in these docks that they're building out every 2 to 3 years. Whereas a stainless steel screw would last probably about 6 or 7, but the freezing and the thawing and the salt water and just pounding on them, the wood doesn't last long enough. So they refuse to use stainless steel screws, so they use a coated screw, much like the HCR or HCRX or whatever the coatings are, but they'll use coated screws. Solid brass is a great corrosion resistance. 400 grade stainless steel, that's a little bit better than food grade stainless steel, but it's a 400 grade. Silicon bronze comes in, a 304 and 305 stainless are up there next. 304 and 305 stainless are to be used in areas where there's water, just not anything with chlorine or salt water. Anything within 10 miles of salt water or in a chlorine pool area needs to be by code 316 stainless. Now, I will tell you this, that the manufacturers, Spax being one of them, GRK, Fasten Master, all of them have done a lot of salt spray testing. I'm not pushing specs, I'm just using them as a demonstration. And you can check all the manufacturers, but a lot of them are doing salt spray testing, and their corrosion coating are standing up better than stainless steel. And as long as contractors get the spec sheets and can show that these screws will stand up, again, I'm not pushing just specs, but because I know of it, because I've talked about it enough and talked with them. They built some canals or built some walls, seawalls up in Florida using their HCRX coated screws and salt spray testing and all that. And they've outlasted stainless, 316 stainless. So check, look at manufacturers and what their corrosion coating is, and you may be able to get away with not using 316 stainless because it's softer and you can't get the length of screws you need to really do any kind of salt water, things that are actual going to be submerged in salt water in any way. But if you're above ground and short screws, again, and it's really hit me of late. Why do we call it stainless steel? There is absolutely no steel in a 304, 305, or 316 stainless. It's nickel and cadmium, and it just depends on the balance of how much nickel and how much cadmium's in there. There is no steel, and that's why they're non-ferrous. You don't get into any kind of steel until you get down into about an 18 grade stainless. Then you'll start to find some iron in there. The 400 and up, they're non-ferrous, they're non-magnetic because there's no steel in it. And yet we call it stainless steel. I don't know. Here you have these are our screws. They're unplated. They're hardened steel. Unplated in the respect. They do have what we call they're unplated, but they've got a lubrication on it. It's a simple process that puts just a lubrication or a dry lube coating, which dry. It helps in driving the screws, but more importantly, it's all about corrosion resistance in shipping. In case you're wondering, there are pretty much no screws made in the United States, in case you wanted to know. They're either made and a lot of companies are now moving them out of Taiwan or China because of the unrest over there and the threat of Xi Jinping taking over Taiwan. A lot of companies are moving to Turkey. There are some companies that make them in Germany or in Canada, but then they bring them into the United States and box them and call them made in the United States. As long as they're packaged in the United States, they can get away with that quote unquote made in the United States or made in the USA label. But for the most part, there are no screws in large quantities made in the US. You can find some companies that make small batches, but no big batch runs here in this country. But that's what gives them their color, is that kind of soft bronze color is the coating that's on there. And again, it's all about just keeping them from corroding in shipment. And again, they add a little bit of lubrication to it as you drive. You still can add screw wax, but that's there. Brass plated screws, again, it's a plating. It's steel screws. They're stronger than brass. Brass is very soft in its own right, much like stainless. But brass plated, you've got a steel underneath it with a brass plating to give you that brass look. A black finish. When I first started at McFeely's 7, 8 years. I'm trying to think. It's 7 or 8 years ago. One of the things and was popular was called a black oxide. Well, the oxide process used a lot of chemicals and, very harmful to the environment, very harmful to people and their lungs, and, all of that. So pretty much everybody's gone away from black oxide and has gone to a black finish. In fact, I just talked to somebody today. They were doing powder coating on some screws to have the heads match their the wood that they're using, and so they're doing powder coating on it, which uses a high temperature, about a 400-degree temperature, to get the material to adhere to the screws. Black you'll find used in a lot of speakers or things where you want to have kind of a nice decorative, a black. You don't want something shiny, but you sure don't want that unplated look. Again, we have clear zinc. Again, it's a coating, largely decorative. It does offer some rust reduction. Only offers about 60 hours of salt spray rating. That's not very much. It's great for interior applications and working with acidic woods like red or white oak. Definitely, if you're working with white oak or red oak, you'll definitely want to countersink it. And especially if you counter bore it, set that head down in there and plug it. It's a poor choice for exterior applications. It's not there. Solid brass screws. Again, we're getting into soft metals. Brass is soft. A lot of times you'll find these in slotted screws because you're doing production type or period pieces or period type pieces or restoration work. Be very careful with them. These do happen to be square drive, but again, if you're doing a production piece or a restoration piece, you got to use the slotted ones. And again, they're soft. Silicon bronze. They're oxidized silicon bronze screws are primarily used for marine boat building, although many people use them for building decks made of western red cedar or redwood because the screws eventually will blend into the color of the wood. The screws right off the production line have a general fresh copper penny look, but they will start to oxidize a little bit over time. Nickel screws, finish remains very popular because of the concealed hinges are nickel. So again, these are going to be used in cabinet making or something where you're going to be attaching hardware and you want to match that nickel plating on the hardware. So you'll have nickel screws. Yellow zinc. Yellow zinc resembles a bright brass finish. It's a plating though, and appears more iridescent. Offers most amount of corrosion resistance, about 100 hours, double the clear zinc. Basically a secondary color plating that's plated on top of clear zinc base, hence the additional corrosion protection. Blue coat, again, this is Craig's proprietary brand. Again, they're for outdoor, and that's the round washer heads, square drive. A lot of times with these, you have to use an undersized or check the drive because the coating is a little bit thicker. You may have to use an undersized square drive bit because that coating takes up a little bit more room. This is a Spax HCR. It was green and they're now changing to black because some of their competitors are black. So they're going black to match their competitors. These are our no corrodes. It's a tan colored. Again, there's a coating just to cover the steel plating, gives you more corrosion resistance. Silicone bronze, primarily used for marine boat building. Many of them used again to do western red or red cedar or redwood decks. And finally, we get to stainless, and there is no steel in them. 304, 305 are the most common, generally used in aesthetic stain. They contain a high nickel content. Again, that increases to increase your resistance corrosion. And again, 316 stainless in most cases. Anytime you're within 10 miles of salt water or you're around a chlorine pool. If you're not around salt water or a chlorine pool, but like at the lakes of Minnesota, 304, 305 stainless are acceptable. So once again, why don't you use drywall screws in woodworking? Because they're threaded all the way to the head and they won't pull your joint tight and you'll snap the head off before you get too pulled tight. If you go to our website, down here in the footer, there is, I created this when I first started. It's called McFeely's. I called it McFeely's University. Got it sectioned out, so I've got a lot of information in here. The second one's, this will look for, nope, that's not the one. I gotta go back. It's the third one, no, fourth one down, screw size comparison. Somebody was asking for this. Here it is. You go down to the very bottom. Oh, where's my? Okay, I'll get that fixed. I know what happened to my PDF? All right, I'll get the link to the PDF on there. I know I've got it. I'll get that on there yet tonight. So you can go there and get it. Here's the screw size drilling chart. I know this one's there because I had to update it. Again, I've got this picture up here of a taper drill bit versus a standard drill bit. And you can see how many threads you're getting using a taper drill bit versus a straight drill bit. But if you go all the way down here to the bottom, right here's the PDF. It opens up and you can print this out. It's 2 pages. And then laminate it together and hang it up on your wall. This guide to woodworking screws. This is what I built out of doing my presentation for getting ready for Weekend with Wood and building this beautiful PowerPoint and nowhere to go. So there's some short information there. I've got to figure out a way of doing this differently and rebuilding this. But I've got a box where you can click on, you can read more. This is a lot of that information I shared with you tonight. I don't have it available for a PDF where we can print it out. I've got to figure out a way to do that. And I think it might be just breaking it down into, types of screws and then head types. These all have the same thing. Description, pictures, recesses. So, a lot of this should look familiar because I took all what I've been doing out of building these pages. You can see some things in here and the various different point types where I didn't even cover tonight. You've got these wings, which are used to counterbore hard material and then go into something, but this wing counterbores to clear out for the thread so it doesn't pull tight. What was one? Oh, I know which one. Threads. Yeah, here's the box threads. Oh, there's one I've got to get in here. Deck screws. I'm going to jump over here real quick. Get to the home page. Did want to touch on these a little bit. Screws, fasteners by application. If you go into composite deck screws have a totally different threading. You'll notice that on a composite deck screw, it's got a type 17 point. It's like regular screw threads, but in composite decking, it's plastic. It's PVC, polyvinyl chloride, and it will start to volcano on you. When the screw initially is cutting in, it will actually create a little volcano, and you'll notice these reverse threads right here. You use these screws, and when it hits these threads, it actually sucks that volcano down to give you a nice, smooth, flat surface. These don't work so well in regular timber, but that's the design for your composite deck, because it's got this reverse threading at the top, and that's the reason why. I had a guy contact me one time and said, I want to put threaded inserts into composite decking. Yeah, it doesn't work. It volcanoes and it doesn't unvolcano. And that left one heck of a big mound. And I'm going to show you a short video I made in the shop last night. It's only 20 seconds long. When people call me and say my driver bits or I'm stripping them out or camming them out, that's my first question. Are you using a drill driver or are you using an impact driver? This first screw I'm driving with an impact driver. And notice that I got that thing all the way down in there. Use a drill driver on slow speed and use the clutch. Now, I'm going to be straight, and I made this rule up. And in general, anything less than a 3-inch screw, you do not need an impact driver for. There's no need for an impact driver. You might as well go get a hammer drill and drill with it, or drive those screws with it, because it has one speed, fast, and you got those 10 threads per inch that are spinning. And a lot of times you have a hard time keeping up with it and keeping that bit engaged in the recess. And Torx is the same thing. Use a drill driver, it slows the speed down, and you use that clutch on there to stop it right where you want it to. Now, yes, I didn't let off the trigger when I ran that screw in and used the entire length of the bit right up to the part where it was held in. But in general, in my world, there is no reason that you need to use an impact driver for anything less than a 3-inch screw. And the other thing is that stainless again is soft. Again, the nice thing is if you cam out or round over your square drive bit, you can go to the grinder, take a little bit off, and you got a fresh bit. Can't do that with Star or Torx or anything like that. But let's see, who is this? David, did that answer your question or address your yeah, impact? I thought so. 99.9% of the time, that's the answer that I get. Well, I'm camming out square drive, and a lot of kids, and here's a test. Time yourself in running 5 screws using an impact driver, and then time yourself running 5 screws using a drill driver on low speed and with a clutch, and you'll probably save yourself maybe 15 seconds. Maybe. So you're not gaining a lot of time. And like I said, that 10 threads per inch at that high rate of speed, it's challenging to keep up with that as it goes in. Screws camming out, again, impact driver and stainless. There's no steel in there. And you're doing 3/16, they are very soft. There is more cadmium in there than there is nickel. So I hope that answers your question. Any other questions? Okay, who learned something tonight?
I did. It was great. Yeah. It was a lot of good information there, Don. Thanks for sharing that. And having all that stuff on your website is very generous as well. That's very helpful. Oh, wait, I think I see, is there another message down there it says? Hang on.
When do you pre-drill with the bit before inserting the screw? It's your call. If you're doing red oak, if you're doing white oak, there's no question. I don't care what you're doing. There is, oops. I have this nice camera that I just put up the signal for it to zoom in on me. Oops. You see if I can back it out a little bit. Anyway, if you're going into hardwoods, if you're near the end of a board, and as a general rule of thumb, if you're within about any closer to about an inch to the end, and you're talking hardwoods and even softwoods, definitely plywood. I just got done here in the community workshop. I have my studio space in. We do a class for we have a big film industry here in Albuquerque. Netflix has a big studio down at the end on the south side of Albuquerque, and they've got like 8 sound stages down there. And once a month we do a class for the prop builders, set builders, prop makers, you know, in general, anybody in the film industry union that wants to come to the class and learn wood shop safety and tools and all that. And we teach them to build an apple box, and we use 3/4 inch plywood. And they screw together the sides and the ends together after they use glue. And really, in that case, the screws are only holding it till the glue dries. Same thing with nails. It's really only holding it till glue dries. But you're drilling into the end there. There's nothing you can do. So pre-drill, and make sure you pre-drill long enough. You don't want to shortchange your pre-drilling, because it'll get in there and the layers will start to split if you don't drill deep enough. Look, if you're not sure, if you're a little hesitant, is this going to split? Pre-drill. Why not? It's just one extra step, and it'll save you from having to make a new piece because you didn't pre-drill and it split. When in doubt, pre-drill. Do you always need to pre-drill? No. Like I said, it all depends on the wood you're going into and how far in. You don't necessarily need to, well, you don't pre-drill for pocket hole screws. You know, you've got that type 17 point, or you've got the serrated edges, the wave cutters, the box cutters, the sawtooth, you know, those type. Those are designed to cut their way in, and a lot of times avoiding that pre-drilling. I want to thank each and every one of you for being here tonight. I don't work. I get to do things like this. I'm 66 years old. I may not look it. I don't dye my hair. I don't work. I get to do things like this. I get to talk to other people about, if you've got questions, do not hesitate to call me at McFeely's and we'll talk through your project. Whatever questions you've got. I get to go to the shop and make a video like I just showed you. I've got a bunch planned for this year and I'm planning on putting a lot out there. Short little videos out on social media, things like that. I get vendors to send me free samples of various different things to try out. So it's like, how's that work? Not in. There's my email address. Got questions? Let me know.
All right. Have a good evening.
Oops, I just sent that to only Patrick. You should send that to everybody.
Yeah, I don't see it. Yeah.
Oh, there it is.
There it is. Yep. Oh, there's something there. What? Oh.
Yep. You've convinced me. There you go. Please do. Please send me the results. I want to know. All right. Again, thanks, guys.
Sounds good. Thank you.
And ladies, have a great one.
Thanks, Don. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next month for the shop tours.